So I'm delighted to be joined today by Vijay Pande, a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz. Vijay joined the firm full-time as a general partner last year to manage the new bio funds that Andreessen Horowitz raised. So I'm interested, Vijay, what's a biotech guy like you who has had a long and distinguished career on the academic side, joining forces with Mark Andreessen, who basically invented the internet browser? It seems an unlikely combination.
Yeah, it's a natural question to think about what is the role of bio in this space. And first off, I want to emphasize that we really are doing something that I think is distinct from biotech. So biotech has a lot of things I don't like. It has a lot of risk. It has a requirement of a lot of money before you get to some answer, and the answer is very stochastic. What I love about software is that at software we can de-risk at every stage of investment, and we can see greater and greater revenue and help the company get bigger and bigger. And so the opportunity here is really to take the software approach and see where software, machine learning, compute can have impacts in biology. And this is something I'm very familiar with. So I founded the Folding Home Distributed Computing Project in 2000. And this is something where we were running in web browsers to do biology. What we could do 15 years ago required almost all the computers on the planet. Now that's something that we can do easily on something like Amazon.
So Vijay, of the sectors that you've mentioned there, are some of those more relevant for venture funding than others? So where are you spending your time specifically at the minute?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the areas that we've talked about are the areas digital therapeutics, cloud biology, and computational medicine. And let me take them each one by one really briefly. So the area of digital therapeutics lies in the fact that for many areas, such as type 2 diabetes, anxiety, depression, PTSD, I think our go-to for cures for this is a pill. But actually, these are behavioral problems, and it's much more natural to have a behavioral solution for this from the point of view of toxicity, but even just from the point of view of efficacy. And the amazing thing is that there are existing behavioral therapies. They just don't scale. And so what digital therapeutics do is that they take these existing behavioral therapies and they let them scale from tens of people to tens of millions of people. And Amada Health is a great example of this. A second area we talked about is computational medicine, and this is, for example, applying machine learning in medicine broadly. And this is where we're already seeing advances in this in the area of clinical tests. So a company like Freenome will use machine learning and deep learning with genomics to be able to tell whether you have cancer early enough such that the cure rate, success rate could be 80%, 100%. The area of cloud biology is still very nascent, and what we're seeing is that companies are trying to take advantage of it or build it inside. It's very, very reminiscent of the early days of Google, where Google built their own data centers with their own machines, and that later led to AWS. And so some companies are building internally, and we're looking at investing in those companies for various applications. Other ones are providing to others. And so that market is very early, but what we're seeing is that the ability to make biology look like programming. And I say look like programming, it really is literally programming. You write a program and it gets done. That is actually already having impact as well.
We've seen a number of VCs invest in healthcare technology over the last 5 or 10 years, and the results have been fine, but they haven't been outstanding. What do you think is different today? Why is the time right now for this sort of approach?
Yeah, I think we've talked about the machine learning aspect, and I think the machine learning aspect really what makes today different. But it's not just that. The fact that mobile is here also makes a difference. So for instance, a company like Amada, which is one of our investments, heavily uses mobile in the area of behavioral therapies to help people avoid getting type 2 diabetes. And having that intrinsic network is just such a fundamentally different world than, say, 5 or 10 years ago.
So long-term, Vijay, how do you think this impacts the way that healthcare is going to be delivered and the sort of healthcare research that happens over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, what is different in managing something like diabetes today is that there are programs for all these behavioral issues, whether it's type 2 diabetes or anxiety or PTSD. And the intriguing thing is these programs work, often using things like cognitive behavioral therapy. The challenge is that they're often sitting in universities and they serve maybe 10 or 50 people and they cost maybe $5,000. And compute can allow these programs to scale. That there can still be a human element with human coaches, but the coaching can be handled in a much more efficient way and in a much better matched way, in addition to curricula that would be online, as well as monitoring and data analytics to see how patients are doing and how they're responding to various things. And so it's really not any one thing there, but it's a combination of data science and mobile and leveraging existing therapies and technologies to be able to just do it bigger.
So Vijay, this feels like a really multidisciplinary approach, taking the best bits of technology and the best bits of life science. Where are the entrepreneurs coming from? Are they coming from a traditional tech background, a traditional life sciences background, or is it a real sort of combination of the two areas?
I think this is a particularly important issue, that we're seeing a new brand of entrepreneur. An entrepreneur that is not just often we would see before the A+ team would have the A+ biologist or doctor and the A+ computer scientist. And what we're seeing now is this individual founder that can do both. So a great example of this is the Freenome co-founder, Gabe, who has a PhD in biology. And I asked him what deep learning code he's using as of all the many variants, and he said, I'm using the one I wrote. and his ability to go deep into the computer science and the biology has offered him technological insights that just wouldn't be there, because when you have it in two separate people, there's what Donald Rumsfeld would call the unknown unknowns. They don't know what the other person doesn't know and what they need to know to inform them. When one person's doing everything, he can, in a computer science sense, go close to the metal on the genomic sense. And that's an opportunity that really is relatively new. And that's another key part of this, is that these founders are emerging. And I would say all of the investments I've made have founders of this character, that I could have a deep discussion with them in the computer science as well as the biology. And that will create this culture within the company, and I think that's a unique opportunity that we only have today.
Mm. And the healthcare industry itself is clearly a massive industry. There's a huge amount of capital every year that gets spent in there. I'm assuming there's a lot of vested interests in that industry that want to keep the industry the way it is because they're doing very nicely out of it. How have you found coming in trying to disrupt a sector like that?
Yeah, I think, and there's challenges because you have to do it, you have to work within the system. So to make an analogy, it probably would be a lot easier for self-driving cars to exist if we could get rid of all the roads or add a whole new set of roads that are just for self-driving cars with no people on it and with sensors and all these things. That would work. And we could have self-driving cars probably today, except think about what a whole new road system would cost. I mean, it would be trillions of dollars. Similarly, we could toss out the healthcare system and maybe start fresh, and that'd be an intriguing sort of thought discussion. But in reality, we can't do that either. And so what we're going to see is people working within the system. So let's say, even though there's machine learning at the heart, it's a clinical test. Your doctor orders the test and gets results. And from the doctor perspective, it's very much like anything else. Or it's a prescribed therapy. Instead of being a drug, it is something like Omada, a so-called digital therapeutic. But it's within the system. And I think the system has seen innovation in some ways. You think about like Genentech in the early days of biologics. In the early days there, people may have said, a protein can't be a drug, but now that's something that's well recognized. I think some people might say software can't be a drug, but similarly, I think, and similarly there was a revolution then, I think we're seeing that revolution now, and there's similar opportunities.
Mm. What else do you think are the main challenges that either you or your portfolio companies are going to face as you look to develop this investment thesis?
One of the things that will be different here is that I think we'll have to work with regulatory agencies more than maybe some, although with that said, companies like Airbnb and Lyft certainly have regulatory issues as well. One of the things that I feel is that people often think regulation is a challenge, and in some ways it is, but it's also a huge opportunity. In that especially in this new space, you can work with regulators and get there first. You can actually have an opportunity where you can help define what the best practices are. And that can build big companies by building barriers to entry. Now, of course, you have to have the goods. You have to have the highly accurate test and something that really deserves that high level. But with that, can be a huge advantage for these companies. And there's basically things like this, that a lot of people view certain challenges of incumbents or regulatory, but these are huge opportunities in terms of barrier to entry or M&A or other acquisition possibilities, partnerships at the end. And I think part of the challenge then will be is how to view what people might think as challenges, but really as opportunities.
How do you think about exits for companies in these areas? Is it likely that they're going to be acquired by the traditional technology companies, by the traditional life science companies? And how do you think the IPO market's going to react?
Yeah, you could take a company like Omada, which has this therapy for pre-diabetics, or a company like Freenome, which has the cancer therapy. I could see a Pfizer buying Omada, and maybe coupling with a drug or maybe not. I could see Google buying a company like Omada. I could see Freenome being bought either by a therapeutics company that wants a diagnostic or by, let's say, a sequencing company that sees the value of this. I think the intriguing thing here now is that the M&A possibilities are very broad, especially if you look at the big incumbents on the software side. Google being a great example. If you look at the Alphabet restructuring, it puts Verily and Calico and these other elements that are very much medical-centric much more in the forefront. And search and the core business is just another one of those verticals. And so I think we'll see a lot of interesting opportunities from there as well.
One of the things we've seen with traditional life science investing, when we look at our database, is that there's very much a limit on the sort of multiples that you can achieve on a single investment. The best we see consistently is around the 10x. And it's very difficult to make it work at a fund level, given the loss ratio that you have there. Do you think that the multiples that you're targeting here are going to look like traditional life science multiples? Or do you think they're going to look more like technology multiples, which can be 100x, even 1,000x if everything goes right?
The return multiples in this space, I think, will look like software multiples because these are software companies. These are companies that have software in their heart, they have high margins, they have all the things we like about software. We de-risk them the way we would de-risk software companies. They really are software companies in this new space.
What surprised you about being a VCBJ?
Actually, I had the expectation that it would be similar to what I've done before. And maybe one of the bigger surprises is just how similar it is. And that in the past, either when starting up a company or in managing things at Stanford, my goals there were to find the very best people, fund them, and then help them and mentor them and work with them for a big picture strategy to do grand things. And that's basically what I'm doing now. And in some ways, it's very much the same people. It's the 20-somethings, 30-somethings at Stanford or something like that. So it's been very enjoyable. And the big surprise for me is just how similar it is and how the same things I had done in the past, I basically am doing now as well.
Okay. Tell us about a company that no one will have heard of today that you think everybody could be talking about in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think, I'm very excited about this recent investment we've done in Freenome. I think that's a great example. This is something where it's going to catch people off guard because people will think the cure to cancer is a pill. And what's going to happen is cure to cancer is going to think about us changing how we think about cancer, that cancer is more about going to the dentist. I know that will sound strange, but let's say if you never went to the dentist for 40 years, 50 years, and then you went to the dentist and said, heal me, and you have tons of cavities. What could be done versus going to the dentist twice a year? Freenome's test, that's something that you could do once a year. You could do twice a year. It's comparable to the cost of a dentist. And something where one could catch cancer immediately, like catching a cavity at a very early stage, and it gets cured. And such that, in that sense, cancer could easily just not exist in 10 years. And that's due to this change in how we think about things. And there's all these things on the back end. You have to have the machine learning to make the tests accurate. You have to have the advances in genomics to make the tests inexpensive. You have to the team to put all this stuff together. There's all these ifs. But I think this is an example of something where we're just going to think about the world differently. And it's companies like Freenome that really are going to push it forward.